This story is titled, Mom and Dad Stole My Luxury Apartments to Gift to My Golden Brother. But when I confidently defended myself without a lawyer, the court discovered their scheme and forced them to pay me compensation. Hey Reddit, I'm still in complete disbelief that this actually happened to me. At 33 years old, I finally bought my first house last year after years of grinding and saving every penny I could. It was the proudest moment of my life, a tangible symbol of everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that less than a year later, I would end up getting sued by my own parents who tried to legally take my house from me and give it to my deadbeat younger brother. The whole situation is so absurd that sometimes I wonder if I'm living in some bizarre alternate reality. But no, this nightmare actually happened, and I'm still processing the emotional fallout. Since many people have asked for details after I mentioned it briefly in another post, I figured I'd share the full story here. Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. I grew up in a middle-class suburb in Wisconsin, where my dad, 60M, worked as a regional manager for a hardware chain, and my mom, 57F, was an administrative assistant at a dentist's office. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable enough. My younger brother Ethan, 29M, was always the golden child of the family. A hockey player, popular in school, and charismatic when he wanted to be. But beneath that surface charm, he basically coasted through life with minimal effort, always expecting things to be handed to him. The favoritism in our family wasn't even remotely subtle. My parents always claimed they had college funds set up for both of us, but when I graduated high school, suddenly there were mysterious investment losses and medical expenses that had supposedly depleted my fund. Strangely enough, those same financial issues never seemed to affect Ethan's college fund a few years later when it was his turn to head off to school. Looking back, I should have recognized this pattern for what it was, but at the time, I just accepted it as the way things were in our family. Throughout high school, the contrast in how we were treated was ridiculous. Ethan received a brand new Chevy Silverado when he turned 16, a $26,000 vehicle that my parents leased for him because he supposedly needed something safe for winter driving. Meanwhile, I was driving a rusted-out 1995 Toyota Corolla with 213,000 miles on it that I purchased for $750 from my uncle's coworker. The car was such a piece of junk that I had to replace the alternator just 2 weeks after buying it, which wiped out 3 months' worth of my grocery store paychecks. I still vividly remember the day Ethan got that truck. Dad filmed the whole surprise reveal in the driveway, complete with a giant red bow on the hood, and proceeded to post it all over Facebook like he was Father of the Year. My own car acquisition experience? Dad simply texted me the seller's phone number and advised me to make sure to check the transmission fluid before you buy it. That was the full extent of his involvement in helping me get my first vehicle. After high school, I spent 2 years at community college while working full-time at a warehouse loading dock. I then transferred to the State University to study cybersecurity, working nights at a 24-hour gas station to make ends meet. I graduated with $39,000 in student loans that I'm still paying off to this day, without a single dollar of assistance from my parents. They didn't even help me buy textbooks. In stark contrast, Ethan was sent to a private university with a staggering $45,000 per year price tag, fully funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. When he lost his partial hockey scholarship for failing 2 classes during his sophomore year, they covered the difference without even blinking. He changed majors 4 times, took 5.5 years to get a communications degree, and enjoyed a lifestyle I could only dream of. My parents bought him a new MacBook Pro every other year, paid for his apartment in the coolest part of campus, gave him a monthly allowance for food, and even funded a semester abroad in Barcelona that was essentially a 6-month party on their dime. That Barcelona semester was perhaps the biggest joke of all. Ethan only took exactly 2 classes, Spanish culture and international communications, and managed to get a C- in both. Instead of actually studying abroad as the program intended, he treated it like an extended European vacation. He came back with travel photos from 11 different countries, none of which were even on his original academic itinerary. My mom was so proud that she had his favorite shots professionally framed and hung them prominently in the living room, as if failing 2 easy classes while partying across Europe was some kind of achievement. I remember during my junior year, I needed emergency dental surgery for an impacted wisdom tooth that had become infected. The procedure cost $1,800 after insurance, and I was completely broke at the time. I reluctantly asked my parents if I could borrow some money until my next paycheck, and my mom's response was to suggest I ask around for payment plans because their budget was supposedly tight. 2 weeks later, Ethan was posting Instagram photos from his spring break trip to Cancun, paid for by guess who? My parents, of course, whose budget apparently wasn't too tight to fund my brother's beach vacation. My best friend Curtis has witnessed this family dynamic since middle school. We met in 7th grade math class and have stayed close ever since. He went through similar family issues of his own. His parents divorced when he was 14, and both remarried people with their own kids, essentially sidelining Curtis in both households. We bonded over being the overlooked ones in our respective families. He's now a successful mechanical engineer at an automotive company, married with a 2-year-old daughter, and has been my voice of reason through all of this. Curtis saw it all firsthand over the years. He was there when I bought a used TI-83 calculator off Craigslist for $40, while Ethan got the latest Apple Watch for time management. He helped me change the oil in my Corolla in 20-degree weather because I couldn't afford the $24.99 oil change special, while Ethan's Silverado was on a premium maintenance plan at the dealership. Having Curtis in my life has been crucial, someone who could validate that I wasn't imagining the blatant favoritism happening in my family. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a cybersecurity firm. The pay was decent, but I was starting from scratch financially. I shared an apartment with 3 other guys to keep costs down, ate ramen and canned tuna because it was cheap, and continued driving that same Corolla until the transmission finally gave up at 289,000 miles. I then bought a used Hyundai for $7,900 and drove that for years while paying down my student loans and building up my savings. My first apartment was a 4-bedroom unit in a complex that had definitely seen better days. My share of the rent was $495 plus utilities, which was all I could afford at the time. I slept with a box fan by my bed 6 months of the year because the air conditioning was unreliable, and roaches were a regular feature of our kitchen no matter how clean we kept it. But it was what I could afford while paying off my student loans and trying to build up some savings for the future. The day I drove off the used car lot in my Hyundai Elantra with 92,000 miles on it, Ethan was posting photos of his latest business meeting at a golf resort. His LinkedIn profile declared him CEO and founder of whatever venture my parents were funding that month. Meanwhile, I was tracking every dollar in a spreadsheet and bringing microwave burritos to work to avoid spending money on lunch. After Ethan graduated, he decided he was too creative for a standard career path. My parents bankrolled a series of his business ventures, including a podcast network, $15,000 down the drain, a drop-shipping store, $12,000 wasted, and a consulting firm that never had a single client. When all those predictably failed, Dad pulled strings with a college buddy and got Ethan a marketing coordinator position at a local brewery. It was an entry-level job, but somehow he immediately had a company laptop and an expense account. The advantages just never stopped coming his way. During this time, I was putting in 60-hour weeks, attending night classes for additional security certifications, and building my professional network the hard way. Every promotion I earned was because I consistently outworked everyone else around me. There were no connections, no handouts, just pure grinding and determination. I started with basic IT support work, moved to network administration, and then specialized in security. Each career move came with added responsibility and better pay, but also meant learning new skills on my own time and my own dime. I lived like a college student for years after graduation, maintaining an extremely frugal lifestyle. I never ate out at restaurants, didn't subscribe to streaming services, I used Curtis's Netflix instead, and only bought new clothes when absolutely necessary. My apartment decor consisted entirely of whatever furniture previous roommates had left behind, plus a few basic IKEA essentials. Every bonus I received went straight to savings or debt paydown, no exceptions. The only vacations I allowed myself were occasional weekends at Curtis's family lake cabin, where we'd fish, grill whatever we caught, and sleep on air mattresses. These simple getaways cost almost nothing, but meant everything to my mental health during those lean years. While Ethan was posting photos from resorts in Cabo and Miami, I was finding joy in the simple pleasure of catching bass at dawn with my best friend. Fast forward to last year. I'd busted my ass, strategically jumped companies twice for better roles, earned several high-level certifications that I paid for entirely myself, and finally hit 6 figures as a senior network security engineer. I'd been saving aggressively since my first real job, forgoing vacations beyond those cabin weekends, avoiding expensive hobbies, skipping designer clothes, and living with roommates until just last year when I finally felt financially secure enough to move into a basic one-bedroom apartment by myself. After a decade of grinding, I finally had enough saved for a down payment on a house. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home with an attached garage and a decent yard in a solid neighborhood about 25 minutes from downtown. The house cost $412,000, and I put down $83,000 from my hard-earned savings. After weeks of shopping around for the best mortgage rate, I locked in a 4.7% interest rate. This wasn't just a purchase. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice and discipline. Closing day was undoubtedly the proudest moment of my life. Sitting at that table signing those papers, then walking out with the keys to my house that I bought with my money that I earned through my work. It's a feeling I can't even properly describe. I felt like I had finally made it, like all those years of struggle were worth it for this moment. Unlike Ethan, who documented every minor achievement with professional quality photos for social media, I didn't post about my home purchase online. I didn't throw a housewarming party or make a big announcement. I just quietly moved my stuff over the weekend with Curtis's help. We ordered pizza, set up my TV and couch, and played Xbox until 2 a.m. on moving day, the adult equivalent of building a blanket fort. It was perfect. The house itself wasn't a showplace by any means. Built in 1998, it was in decent condition but definitely needed some updates. The kitchen had functional but dated appliances. The carpet in the bedrooms had seen better days, and the bathroom fixtures were straight out of the 90s. But the bones were solid. Good roof, newer HVAC system, no foundation issues, and more importantly, it was mine. Every outdated fixture and imperfect wall represented a future project that I could tackle when I had the time and money. My first projects were all practical improvements. I changed all the locks and garage door codes immediately, installed a Ring doorbell and security system, and replaced the ancient water heater that was clearly on its last legs. Then came small, cosmetic improvements, painting the dingy beige walls in the living areas, replacing the most dated light fixtures, power washing the deck and fence. Each improvement, no matter how small, filled me with a sense of accomplishment and pride. 2 weeks after moving in, I was still reveling in homeowner bliss when my mom's name flashed on my phone screen one evening. I answered, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Hey Mom, what's up?" I tried to sound casual. "Hi honey, how's the new house? Getting all settled in?" Her tone was overly cheerful, which immediately put me on alert. "Yeah, just putting up some shelves. Everything's good." I mentally prepared myself for the real reason behind her call. "That's wonderful, sweetie." There was the inevitable pause. "So I'm calling because we have a bit of a situation with Ethan." Of course they did. There was always a situation with Ethan. What happened this time? I couldn't keep the weariness out of my voice. "Well, he's had a bit of a setback. The brewery let him go yesterday." Let him go was our family code for fired, and I'd heard it used for Ethan multiple times over the years. "You know how these places are," she continued. "No appreciation for creative types." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Apparently, showing up 15 minutes late a few times is grounds for termination these days." "Most jobs do expect you to show up on time, Mom," I pointed out. She ignored my comment completely. "The real problem is his apartment. Without his job, he can't make rent. His landlord is being completely unreasonable about it." "Unreasonable meaning he expects to be paid?" I scoffed, unable to hide my disdain. "Honey, this is serious," Mom said, her voice taking on that wounded tone she used when I wasn't immediately agreeing with her. "Ethan needs a place to stay. Just temporarily, of course. Just until he finds another job and gets back on his feet." My stomach dropped as I realized where this conversation was heading. "And you're calling me because?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, you have that beautiful new house. 3 bedrooms for just one person. I'm sure you could help your brother out for a few weeks." "Mom, I just moved in," I protested. "I'm still unpacking. And Ethan and I have completely different lifestyles." I tried to sound reasonable despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "It would only be for a short time," she insisted. 4 weeks at the absolute maximum, just until he finds something else." There was that tone again, the one that made it clear she expected immediate compliance. "I don't think this is a good idea," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Your father and I would really appreciate it, honey. Family helps family, right? That's how we raised you." And just like that, the Guilt Trip Express had left the station right on schedule. "Let me think about it, okay? I need to—" "There's not really time to think, honey," she interrupted. Ethan has to be out by tomorrow. His landlord already has someone new lined up. Of course, there was a convenient deadline creating artificial urgency. We'd let him stay here, she continued. But you know your father's back isn't good, and we converted Ethan's old room to your father's home office. I found it interesting how Ethan's childhood bedroom had been preserved like a shrine until the exact moment he might have needed to move back home. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before she could guilt me further. I immediately called Curtis, needing a reality check from the one person who truly understood my family dynamics. My brother got fired again, I said without preamble when he answered. Let me guess, Mom called asking for cash? Curtis had seen this movie before, too. Worse, they want him to move in with me. I could hear the resignation in my own voice. The snort was audible even over the store announcements in the background. Curtis was clearly at the home improvement store he frequented on weekends. Please tell me you laughed and hung up, he said. They're saying it's just for a few weeks, I explained, already knowing what his response would be. Dude, number one, absolutely not. Have you forgotten the PlayStation incident of 2018? I winced at the memory. Ethan had borrowed my PlayStation 4 for just a weekend and returned it 3 months later with 2 broken controllers and several missing games. When I'd pointed out the damage, he'd shrugged it off with a casual, "That's what happens when you actually use stuff, bro." It's different now, I argued weakly. I own the house. I can set boundaries. And how exactly are you planning to enforce those boundaries? Curtis challenged. You going to change the locks when he inevitably overstays? You know he'll cry to your parents the minute you try to establish any rules. He's family, Kurt, I sighed, falling back on the same manipulation my mother had just used on me. Bro, I love you, but you're being an idiot, Curtis said bluntly. This has disaster written all over it. I'm talking about Titanic meets Hindenburg levels of disaster. I'll think about it, I said, though we both knew I was already caving. No, you won't, Curtis replied with absolute certainty. You'll cave because your mom used the magic family guilt words. And then you'll call me in 3 weeks when Ethan has taken over your living room and eaten everything in your fridge. You're exaggerating, I protested half-heartedly. I'm being realistic. Your family has a PhD in taking advantage of you. After we hung up, my phone immediately rang again. This time it was my dad, right on cue for the tag team guilt offensive. Your mother tells me you're hesitating about helping your brother, he said, without bothering with a greeting. His voice had that authoritative tone he used when he expected immediate compliance. The same one he'd used when I was 16 and dared to question why Ethan got a new truck while I was driving a death trap. Look, I know you two have had your differences, he continued, but he's trying to get back on track. This would just be temporary until he finds another job. 4 weeks tops. I promise. And if it goes longer? I asked, already knowing there would be a million excuses when that deadline arrived. It won't, Dad assured me confidently. Your mother and I will make sure of it. I don't know, Dad. My resistance was crumbling and we both knew it. He's already packed up his stuff. We told him you'd probably say yes. His tone suggested this was a done deal. Wait, what? He started packing? I was incredulous. Before you even called me? We knew you'd do the right thing. You always do. And there it was, the backhanded compliment that doubled as emotional manipulation. The unspoken message was clear. Unlike your brother, you're reliable and can be counted on to bail him out. Again. Fine, I said, already regretting the word as it left my mouth. But 4 weeks maximum. If he doesn't have a job and his own place by then, he's out. Even as I set this boundary, I knew they would all ignore it. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find not just Ethan, but the entire family. Mom, Dad, Ethan, and a car full of his stuff. The moving committee had arrived in full force, as if they'd been waiting around the corner for my reluctant agreement. Ethan grinned as I opened the door, wearing an expression of entitlement thinly disguised as gratitude. Hey bro, thanks for the save. This place looks sick. He was already looking past me, assessing his new rent-free accommodation. Behind him, Mom beamed like this was some heartwarming family reunion rather than the result of relentless guilt tripping. Dad was already unloading suitcases from the trunk, grunting with each lift in a theatrical display of his supposedly bad back. The same back that somehow hadn't prevented him from playing 18 holes of golf the previous weekend, according to his Facebook posts. Ethan pushed past me into the house, immediately checking out the space as if he were a prospective buyer rather than a temporary guest. Sweet setup. The TV's a bit small, but we can fix that. Which room's mine? He was already claiming territory before even putting down his backpack. I stood there, keys in hand, watching them all invade my space without a hint of genuine appreciation. I was already sensing the avalanche of regret heading my way, and it wouldn't take long to arrive. Within 20 minutes, Ethan had commandeered the second largest bedroom, connected his gaming PC to my internet, and was sprawled on my couch scrolling through his phone as if he'd lived there for years. Mom was rearranging my kitchen cabinets to make space for Ethan's things. Apparently, his extensive collection of protein powder containers and energy drink cases required special accommodation. Dad was wandering around my yard offering unsolicited advice about my lawn care routine, pointing out areas that needed more attention as if I'd asked for a landscaping consultation. When they finally left, after spending an hour rearranging my home to better suit Ethan's needs, my brother immediately ordered pizza on my account, claiming he'd pay me back when his final check cleared. I knew from past experience that this repayment would never materialize. I texted Curtis a picture of the chaos that had erupted in my house in less than an hour. Ethan's gaming equipment taking over my living room, his clothes already spilling out of the guest room dresser, and 3 empty energy drink cans on my kitchen counter. His response was immediate. The Titanic has left the dock. I'll prepare the lifeboat and the "I told you so" speech. Maybe we should start a betting pool on how long before he brings home a random Tinder date and uses your bed. I laughed despite my growing sense of dread. At least someone understood exactly what I'd gotten myself into. To my surprise, the first week after Ethan moved in was actually decent. He helped unpack some boxes that were still sitting in the garage, assembled a bookshelf I'd bought from IKEA but hadn't put together yet, and seemed genuinely appreciative of the living arrangement. He even cleaned up after himself in the kitchen a couple of times, which was so out of character that I wondered if he'd been replaced by a pod person. That initial cooperation lasted exactly 9 days. I had the guest bedroom set up with a queen bed, dresser, nightstand, and desk. I'd made space in the kitchen cabinets and fridge for his food, given him a spare house key, and basically treated him like an adult roommate. I'd even written up a simple list of house guidelines. Things like cleaning up shared spaces, giving me a heads up before having guests over, and respecting quiet hours during the work week. Ethan had nodded along as I went through the list, acting as if these completely reasonable expectations were perfectly fine with him. By week 2, however, Ethan started acting like he owned the place. The transformation was both swift and predictable. Suddenly, dishes were piling up in the sink, often with food still crusted on them. He began inviting friends over without asking or even telling me beforehand. His gaming setup gradually expanded from the guest bedroom to take over a significant portion of the living room, with cords creating tripping hazards across my carefully arranged furniture. He'd blast music at 1 a.m. on weeknights when I had to be up at 6 o'clock for work, eat food I'd bought without replacing it, and leave wet towels on my new bathroom floor, a habit that was already causing the baseboards to show signs of water damage. When I'd mention these issues, he'd give vague assurances about being more careful or definitely taking care of that tomorrow, but nothing ever changed. The first time I came home from work to find 3 strangers in my living room playing my Xbox, I was caught completely off guard. They had made themselves entirely at home, with feet propped up on my coffee table and empty beer bottles scattered around the room. "Hey, bro!" Ethan called from the couch, barely looking up from the game. "These are the guys!" He gestured vaguely at his friends as if the guys was sufficient introduction, and I should somehow know who they were. They had ordered pizza and left the empty boxes on my coffee table, along with several wadded-up napkins and half-empty soda cans. One guy had his feet up on my couch with his shoes still on, muddy shoes on the light gray couch I'd saved for months to buy. Another was rummaging through my refrigerator as if he were in his own home. Ethan acted like this was completely normal behavior, as if I should be delighted to come home after a 10-hour workday to find my living space invaded by strangers making themselves at home with my possessions. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked Ethan, motioning toward the kitchen. "We're in the middle of a match, dude," he replied, eyes still glued to the screen. "Give me like 20 minutes. I stood there for a moment, exhausted after a particularly difficult day at work, watching these strangers treat my home with complete disregard. The sense of violation was overwhelming. This was my house, the one place where I was supposed to have control, where I could relax and decompress. And now it felt like just another space where my needs and boundaries didn't matter. Later that night, after the guys had finally left, without helping clean up, of course, I tried talking to Ethan reasonably. I went through the house guidelines again, emphasizing the importance of giving me notice before having guests over and respecting my property. "It's not a big deal," Ethan said dismissively. "They're good guys. They weren't doing any harm." That's not the point, I explained, trying to keep my frustration in check. This is my home. I need to know when people are going to be here, especially when I'm not home. Whatever, Ethan sighed dramatically. I didn't realize I needed to submit a formal request to have friends over. It's not like I'm throwing ragers or something. Look, I'm not asking for a formal request, I said. Just a text saying, hey, having some friends over this afternoon. That's basic roommate courtesy. Fine, he muttered. I'll text you next time. His tone made it clear he thought I was being unreasonable. This type of conversation became a regular occurrence. Ethan would cross a boundary. I'd attempt to address it calmly. He'd acknowledge it grudgingly, and then he'd completely ignore everything we'd discussed. When I'd confront him again, he'd always have an excuse ready, or he'd say I was being uptight and acting like Dad, a comparison he knew would sting. I was talking to Curtis about the situation over lunch one day at a sandwich place near my office, venting my frustrations about Ethan's complete disregard for my home and boundaries. I'm telling you, Curtis warned, leaning forward with a serious expression. He's establishing residency. In most states, if someone stays at a place for a certain amount of time, receives mail there, and has their belongings there, they can claim legal residency. That means if you wanted him out, you'd have to go through formal eviction proceedings. That sounds paranoid, I replied, brushing off his concern. My brother might be a mooch, but he wouldn't go that far. Even as I said it, though, a knot formed in my stomach. After all, I wouldn't have thought my parents capable of many of the things they'd done over the years. Yet here we were. Just be careful, Curtis advised. Document everything. Keep copies of your original agreement, texts, emails, whatever you have showing this was supposed to be temporary. I nodded, but didn't take his warning as seriously as I should have. My brother might be selfish and entitled, but he wouldn't try to legally claim my house. Would he? As it turned out, I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. 1 month turned into 2 with no signs of Ethan making any effort to find a job or hunt for his own apartment. His daily routine consisted of sleeping until noon, playing video games all day while I was at work, then going out with his friends at night, often returning in the early hours of the morning with no consideration for the fact that I had to be up for work. The 4-week deadline my parents had promised came and went without any acknowledgement from anyone in the family. What made matters worse was that my parents started dropping by unannounced to check on Ethan. At least, that's what they claimed. But it quickly became apparent they were actually scoping out my house, making mental notes of the layout and features as if conducting an informal appraisal. They'd make comments that seemed innocent on the surface, but revealed their true intentions. Ethan's room is a bit small for a long-term setup, don't you think? Mom would say casually, despite the fact that it was the second largest bedroom in the house and more than adequate for a temporary stay. Or Dad would suggest, you should let Ethan set up his gaming station in the living room since he's home all day. It makes more sense for him to use the common space during the day when you're not here. As if my living room should be converted into Ethan's personal entertainment center because I committed the sin of having a job. Dad would also walk around inspecting things, pointing out minor flaws in my home with the air of someone doing me a tremendous favor. These gutters need cleaning, he'd note, looking up at the roofline with a critical eye. Your lawn service missed a spot over there by the fence. This garage door opener sounds like it needs maintenance. That grinding noise isn't normal. He'd catalog every imperfection he could find, never once offering to help address any of these supposed issues, just documenting them as if building a case that I wasn't taking proper care of the property. I also started noticing small things disappearing around the house. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Maybe I had misplaced that pair of wireless earbuds, or perhaps that portable phone charger was in a different drawer than I remembered. But as more items went missing, my PlayStation controller, a jacket I rarely wore but knew was in my closet, a Bluetooth speaker, a pattern emerged. When confronted about these missing items, Ethan always had the same response. Dude, I haven't seen it. Maybe you left it at work or in your car. He'd shrug with an expression of complete innocence, as if the suggestion that he might have taken something was deeply offensive. Then I'd find my jacket in his closet when I was looking for a screwdriver he'd borrowed and not returned. Or I'd discover my earbuds in his backpack when I moved it off the kitchen counter to clean. The Bluetooth speaker turned up in his car when he asked me to grab his phone charger from the center console. Each time I'd confront him with the evidence, he'd act surprised. Oh, is that yours? I thought it was mine. Or, I was just borrowing it for a day. I was definitely going to put it back. The kitchen became a particular war zone in our domestic conflict. I'd come home to find every dish dirty, food left out overnight, growing fuzzy coatings of mold, and spills on the counter that had dried into sticky residue. The garbage would be overflowing, sometimes with empty cartons balanced precariously on top of the pile, but never actually taken out to the bin outside. When I'd ask Ethan to clean up his mess, he'd always claim he was just about to do that, or that he was waiting for the dishwasher to finish before putting away the clean dishes and loading the dirty ones. Sometimes he'd promise to take care of it right after this game, but hours later, nothing would have changed. My utilities jumped significantly with Ethan's presence. He would crank the AC to 65 degrees in the middle of summer, then inexplicably open windows because he needed fresh air, effectively cooling the entire neighborhood while my electricity meter spun wildly. He'd take 30-minute showers twice a day, using all the hot water and leaving puddles all over the bathroom floor. Every light in the house would be on while he was gaming, with his 3 monitors running 12+ hours a day, plus the TV, plus whatever other electronics he was charging or using. My electric bill doubled from what it had been when I lived alone, and the water bill went up by 80%. When I brought these increases to Ethan's attention and suggested he contribute to the higher utility costs he was causing, he just shrugged and suggested I upgrade to more energy-efficient appliances, since my current ones were probably outdated anyway. The fact that I would be the one paying for these hypothetical new appliances seemed entirely lost on him. 3 months into what was supposed to be a 4-week stay, I'd had enough. The final straw came when I returned home from work one day to discover that Ethan had taken it upon himself to rearrange our living arrangements. He had moved my entire home office setup from the room I had carefully organized to the smallest bedroom in the house, so that he could have the room with better light and more space for his own use. "Ethan!" I shouted, standing in the doorway of what used to be my office, now crammed haphazardly into a space too small for my desk and filing cabinets. He sauntered in from the kitchen, energy drink in hand, looking completely unbothered by my obvious distress. "Oh hey, you're home early," he observed casually, as if we were discussing the weather. "What the hell is this?" I gestured at the chaos around me, my carefully organized workspace now a jumbled mess of equipment and papers. He shrugged with that infuriating nonchalance that had become his default response to everything. "Just made a couple changes. That room gets way better natural light. It'll be better for my streaming setup." I could feel my blood pressure rising dangerously. "You moved my entire freaking office without asking me? In my house that I pay for?" "It's not a big deal, man," he said, taking a sip of his energy drink. "I was careful with your stuff. Most of it anyway." He winced slightly. "Your chair rolled over one of those cables. The blue one. Probably fine, though." "You had no right to touch my things," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is my house. You're a guest here." Ethan's expression changed then, his casual mask slipping to reveal a glimpse of the entitlement beneath. "Seriously? You're going to be that petty about a room? It's just a space, dude. What difference does it make which one I use? It makes a difference because I set up my office exactly how I wanted it in that specific room. And you had no right to move it without asking me." He rolled his eyes dramatically. "Classic. Always been about the money with you, hasn't it? You always have to lord it over everyone that you have a house and a fancy job. Money?" I was genuinely confused by this deflection. "This isn't about money. It's about freaking respect, something you clearly know nothing about." Ethan rolled his eyes, clearly not taking my anger seriously. "Look, it's not a big deal. I'll help you set up the office in the other room. It'll be fine," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if he was doing me a favor by offering to help fix the problem he'd created. "No," I said firmly, finally standing my ground. "You're going to move everything back exactly the way it was, tonight, and then you're going to start looking for your own place. I was done being taken advantage of in my own home." He smirked in response, a knowing expression that made my stomach drop. "Actually, I was thinking I'd stay through the end of the year. Save on expenses, you know. Mom and Dad think it's a good plan." Something in me snapped at that moment. The casual way he revealed that they had been discussing my house, making plans for his extended stay without even consulting me, pushed me over the edge. I grabbed the front of his shirt, surprising both of us with my sudden physical response. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice low and intense. "This is not a family vote. This is my house. You were supposed to be here for 4 weeks. It's been 3 freaking months. You've contributed nothing, respected nothing, and now you think you're just going to stay indefinitely? Get your hands off me, man. What's your problem?" Ethan twisted away from my grip, his expression shifting from surprise to indignation, as if he was the one being wronged. "My problem is you," I replied, pointing at his chest. "You and this entitled attitude where you think you can just coast through life taking whatever you want without consequences." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Big Shot Network Engineer," he mocked, his voice taking on a whiny, exaggerated tone. "So sorry we can't all be perfect like you, working 60 hours a week at some boring job just to buy stuff no one cares about." I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. Arguing with Ethan had always been like this. He would twist everything, make personal attacks, and somehow turn himself into the victim no matter what he'd done. "You have 30 days to find another place," I stated as calmly as I could manage. "That's it. I'm done." Ethan laughed in my face, an ugly sound full of contempt. "Yeah, and where am I supposed to go? You know I can't afford rent on my own right now. I don't have a job, remember?" "Not my freaking problem," I responded, my patience completely exhausted. "Get a job. Get roommates. Go back to mom and dad's. I don't care, but you're not staying here. This arrangement is over." The conversation left me shaking with anger and a strange sense of guilt that I hadn't been able to completely shake despite years of therapy. Even though I knew I was in the right, there was still that nagging voice telling me I was being selfish, that family should help family. It's amazing how deeply those messages get ingrained. That weekend, my parents invited me to Sunday dinner, a transparent attempt to address the Ethan situation, as my mother had put it in her overly casual text invitation. I almost declined, but decided it was better to have this conversation in person, with clear boundaries established once and for all. After we'd finished eating a tense meal where everyone avoided the obvious topic, they sat me down in the living room for what felt like an intervention. With practiced solemnity, as if they had rehearsed this speech, my parents explained their solution to the current situation. Dad stated that since I was so established in my career and financially stable, while Ethan was still finding his path in life, it made logical sense for Ethan to stay with me indefinitely. He presented this as if it were a perfectly reasonable conclusion that any rational person would reach. Mom chimed in that they'd even help with some of the utilities if needed, a token gesture given how much Ethan was costing me, but emphasized that Ethan deserved a stable living situation while he worked to create opportunities for himself. The phrasing was telling, not while he actively pursued opportunities, but while he waited for them to magically materialize. I was absolutely floored by their proposal. This wasn't about a temporary situation anymore. They were trying to turn my house into Ethan's permanent residence, with me serving as his reluctant landlord, maid, and financial support. All because he was still finding his path at 29 years old. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "We had an agreement. 4 weeks. It's been 3 months, and he hasn't made any effort to find a job or his own place. He's moving out as we originally discussed." "You've always had it easier," Mom said, her voice breaking as tears welled up in her eyes. A performance I had seen many times before when she wasn't getting her way. "You're so disciplined and focused while Ethan struggles. Not everyone is like you." I laughed bitterly at the absurdity of her statement. "Easier? Are you serious? I worked for everything I have. I put myself through college. I lived with roommates for years to save money. I drove a car that broke down every other month because that's all I could afford. Nothing was handed to me." "Family helps family," Dad growled, his expression hardening. It was his final argument, the trump card he always played when logic failed him. "That's what we raised you to believe." "Loyalty?" I pushed back my chair, standing up to face him. "Was it loyal when you funded his degree but not mine? When you bought him cars while I drove a death trap? When you gave him allowance money in college while I worked night shifts at a gas station? Don't talk to me about loyalty." From the corner of the room, Ethan smirked, enjoying the drama. "Always the victim," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Poor you with your fancy house and your 6-figure job." I turned to him, pointing my finger directly at his smug face. "You're out in 30 days, as I said. Not negotiable. Either find a new place on your own, or Mom and Dad can make room for you here. But you're not staying with me anymore." I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of guilt and liberation. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to their manipulation and refused to be the family scapegoat. It was terrifying, but also empowering in a way I hadn't expected. The final straw came a week later. I had developed a severe migraine at work, blinding pain, visual auras, the whole miserable package. I texted Ethan around noon, letting him know I wasn't feeling well and was coming home early to rest in a dark, quiet room. His response was a simple thumbs-up emoji, which I took as acknowledgement. When I pulled into my driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon, there were 6 cars I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. Music was blasting so loud I could hear it before I even got out of my car. The bass was pounding hard enough to vibrate my windows, each thump sending fresh waves of pain through my already throbbing head. I walked into my own home to find what could only be described as a full-blown party. There were at least 15 people scattered throughout my living room and kitchen, most of whom I had never seen before. Someone had dragged my new grill out to the deck and was cooking burgers, flipping them carelessly and letting grease splatter all over the newly refinished wood. Someone else had spilled what looked like red wine on my light gray couch, a stain I knew would never completely come out. As I stood in the doorway, trying to process the scene through waves of migraine pain, I noticed a cigarette burn on the deck railing I had just sanded and restained the previous weekend. Looking further, I realized someone had given an unauthorized tour of my bedroom, where they had apparently tested out my bed, leaving the covers rumpled and a glass of something dark on my nightstand without a coaster, leaving a perfect ring on the wood. I completely lost it. "Everybody out!" I roared, ignoring the stabbing pain in my head. "Now, get out of my house!" The music cut off abruptly, and suddenly all eyes were on me. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, beer in hand, looking more annoyed than apologetic. "Dude, chill," he said, spreading his hands in a calming gesture that only infuriated me more. "It's just a few friends." "I don't care if it's the freaking Queen of England," I snapped. "I told you I was coming home sick with a migraine. And I find this?" I gestured wildly at the chaos around us. "Everyone who doesn't live here needs to leave. Right now." There was an awkward shuffling as people gathered their belongings, muttering about me being uptight and overreacting. I stood by the door, ushering them out one by one, ignoring their glares and Ethan's embarrassed attempts to smooth things over. When the last guest had left, I turned to Ethan, trembling with rage despite the pounding in my head. "You too! Pack your things! You're leaving now!" "What, you can't be serious," he scoffed. "Because of one little get-together?" "This isn't about one party," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is about months of disrespect, entitlement, and taking advantage of my generosity. I'm done. Get your stuff and get out." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, crossing his arms defiantly. "Mom and Dad talked to their friend who's a lawyer. I've been living here for over 3 months. I have residential rights now. You can't just throw me out without proper eviction notice." And there it was. The confirmation of exactly what Curtis had warned me about. They had been planning this all along, establishing Ethan's residency to make it difficult for me to remove him. The realization made me feel physically ill, the betrayal settling in my stomach like a cold, heavy stone. "Residential rights or not, you're leaving now," I said, my migraine momentarily forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. I was done being manipulated and taken advantage of. He yelled that I couldn't make him leave, that our parents had told him he had residential rights after staying there for 3 months. He quoted legal terminology he clearly didn't understand, puffing his chest out as if the mere mention of legal concepts would make me back down. This was clearly something they had discussed and planned for, a contingency to ensure that my temporary help would become a permanent arrangement whether I wanted it or not. Something in me snapped. After years of being the reasonable one, the responsible one, the one who always gave in for the sake of family peace, I'd finally reached my absolute limit. In that moment, I didn't care about legal technicalities or potential consequences. I just wanted him out of my house. I literally showed him to the door, physically guiding him with a firm hand on his shoulder. When he tried to plant his feet and resist, I simply walked to his room and started gathering his things. I tossed his gaming PC and clothes onto the front lawn, ignoring his protests and threats to call the police. His precious computer equipment landed with a concerning crack on the grass, causing him to momentarily forget his legal posturing as he rushed to check if his streaming setup was damaged. While he was distracted with his equipment, I moved swiftly through the house, gathering more of his belongings and adding them to the growing pile on the lawn. Clothes, shoes, his collection of designer baseball caps, the expensive noise-canceling headphones our parents had bought him for Christmas. All of it went out the door. "You can't do this!" he kept shouting, his face red with anger. "This is illegal! I'm calling Mom and Dad! I'm calling the police!" "Go ahead," I replied calmly, continuing to remove his things from my house. "Call whoever you want. Just do it from somewhere else. Once I had removed the bulk of his possessions, I closed the door firmly in his face and engaged the deadbolt. I then proceeded to change every lock in the house that night, calling an emergency locksmith who charged me triple the normal rate for the after-hours service. It was worth every penny. I also disabled the garage door opener and changed the code on the keypad outside. I wasn't taking any chances. While the locksmith worked, I went through the house methodically, looking for anything else belonging to Ethan that needed to be removed. I piled additional items I found by the front door, ready to add them to the lawn collection if necessary. I called Curtis immediately after the locksmith left, still running on adrenaline and needing someone to confirm I wasn't overreacting. "He's gone," I said when Curtis answered. I threw him out, literally put his stuff on the lawn and changed the locks. There was a moment of silence before Curtis responded, "Well, damn, I didn't think you'd actually do it. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted, suddenly feeling the full weight of my migraine returning. But I couldn't take it anymore. They were trying to establish some kind of squatter's rights. They had it all planned out. "Look, I'm coming over," Curtis said decisively. "I'll bring pizza. We need to document everything in case this gets ugly." Curtis arrived 40 minutes later with pizza, beer, and his usual pragmatic approach to crisis management. We walked through the house together, taking time-stamped photos of all the damage Ethan and his friends had caused. The wine stain on the couch, the cigarette burn on the deck, scratches on the hardwood floor where someone had dragged a heavy piece of furniture, the ring marks on my bedroom nightstand. Curtis helped me create a detailed inventory with estimated repair costs for each item. As we were cleaning up some of the mess, Curtis noticed something concerning. "Hey, isn't that where you kept your spare car key?" He pointed to an empty hook in the kitchen, where I usually hung my backup key. I checked my key ring to confirm I had my primary key, then looked around to see if the spare had fallen. It was nowhere to be found. "He must have taken it," I realized aloud, another violation to add to the growing list. "We should get your car rekeyed first thing tomorrow," Curtis suggested, already pulling out his phone. "My cousin works at a dealership. I'll text him now to see if he can fit you in early." We had my car rekeyed the next morning, an expensive but necessary precaution given Ethan's vindictive nature and apparent willingness to escalate the situation. I wasn't taking any chances with my property or safety at this point. The storm that followed my decisive action was nuclear in its intensity. Ethan immediately called our parents, who both showed up at my house around midnight, pounding on my door and threatening to call the police for what they termed an illegal eviction. I watched them through the security camera I had installed, refusing to open the door or engage with them in any way. They eventually left after about 20 minutes of alternating between angry demands and guilt-inducing pleas, promising unspecified consequences for my actions. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in tenant law and had formal eviction papers drawn up. Even though I believed Ethan had no real legal right to stay in my home since he'd never paid rent or signed any kind of agreement, I wanted to cover all my bases legally. I had the papers delivered to Ethan at our parents' house, where he'd predictably retreated after his dramatic removal from my property. My security cameras caught Mom and Dad driving by my house 3 times the next day, slowing down to study the property each time. They weren't subtle about their surveillance, probably hoping to catch me outside where they could confront me directly. I stayed inside and watched their increasingly frustrated circling via my security system app. They left several voicemails demanding I return Ethan's property. Apparently, the TV from the guest room and some kitchenware had mysteriously transformed from my possessions into his belongings in their minds. Each message escalated in tone, from guilt-tripping, "How could you do this to your own brother?" to outright threats, "You'll regret this when we're done." Mom's last voicemail actually said, "You'll be sorry when you see what happens next." The ominous statement sent a chill down my spine despite the warm spring weather. It didn't sound like the typical empty threat. There was a strange confidence in her voice that suggested they had something specific planned. I soon discovered exactly what that plan was, and it was even more insane than I could have imagined. Instead of accepting that their golden child would no longer be subsidized by his older brother, my parents consulted with one of Ethan's friend's fathers, who happened to be a real estate attorney. I had met this man at a family barbecue a few years back. He was loud, opinionated, and clearly impressed with Ethan's ability to charm people despite having no real accomplishments to his name. In hindsight, I should have seen this particular alliance forming, but the extent of their scheme still caught me completely off guard. 3 days after I evicted Ethan from my home, I was served with legal papers while at work. My hands shook as I read through the document, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My own parents were suing me for my house. Yes, you read that correctly. They were actually attempting to legally take my home from me and give it to my brother. The lawsuit document claimed they had invested emotionally and financially in my success throughout my life, that Ethan had established tenancy and had been illegally evicted after 3 months of rent-free living in my home. According to the filing, I had a moral obligation to provide for family in need, and that Ethan's previously unmentioned mental health struggles required a stable living environment. They argued that since I was financially capable of purchasing another home, I should surrender this one to my brother. Most insanely, they weren't just asking for temporary accommodation for Ethan. They were demanding that the deed to my house be transferred to him while I continued paying the mortgage for at least 1 year until Ethan could establish sufficient credit to take over the payments himself. The entire lawsuit document was 27 pages of delusional entitlement dressed up in legal language that made my head spin. One section meticulously detailed all the supposed contributions my parents had made to my success throughout my life, including such groundbreaking parental achievements as providing nutrition during formative years. Translation: they fed me as a child. Congratulations on meeting the bare minimum requirements of parenthood. And emotional support during educational advancement. Translation: they occasionally asked how school was going between focusing on Ethan's hockey tournaments. According to their filing, these standard parental responsibilities somehow constituted an implicit investment in my future earnings and assets, entitling them to a return on their investment in the form of my house. Another section outlined Ethan's supposed contributions to my property, which was even more absurd. These included consultation on interior design — he once suggested I get a bigger TV — and landscape improvements. He mowed the lawn a single time when I had a work emergency. According to their filing, these minor tasks somehow constituted sweat equity in my home, as if his one-time lawn mowing was equivalent to the $83,000 down payment I'd made. The most outrageous part was their request for relief. Not only did they want me to sign over my house to Ethan and continue paying the mortgage, but they also requested I pay $15,000 for Ethan's emotional distress caused by the traumatic eviction process. The document conveniently omitted any mention of the unauthorized party, the damage to my property, or the fact that he had massively overstayed the agreed-upon time frame. They also wanted me to cover all their legal fees, which I'm sure Ethan's friend's dad wasn't charging at a discount. I sat at my desk at work, reading through this legal fantasy, alternating between disbelief, rage, and a strange urge to laugh at the sheer audacity of it all. How could the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally try to legally steal the home I had worked so hard to earn? What kind of parents sue their own child for property? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Curtis came over the night I got served and was absolutely floored when I showed him the lawsuit. He read through the document with growing disbelief, occasionally letting out incredulous laughs or muttering, "What the actual hell?" at particularly outrageous clauses. "I've heard of entitled families before," he said, shaking his head as he flipped through the pages. "But this is next-level insanity. They actually think a court will force you to give your house to your deadbeat brother and keep paying for it?" He put me in touch with his brother-in-law, Scott, who worked at a law firm specializing in property disputes. Scott agreed to review the lawsuit and called me the next day after reading through it. He actually laughed out loud at parts of it during our call. "This is honestly the most frivolous property claim I've seen in 15 years of practice," he assured me. "Any judge with even minimal competence will throw this out immediately. They have no legal leg to stand on whatsoever." Scott offered to represent me at a reduced rate out of professional courtesy to Curtis, but warned that even with the discount, legal fees could run between $5,000 to $8,000 given the need to prepare formal responses, attend hearings, and possibly deal with appeals if my family was determined to pursue this madness. Against Scott's professional advice, I decided to represent myself in court. The case was so absurdly without merit, and I had all the documentation needed to prove I purchased the house entirely with my own money. Plus, hiring a lawyer would cost thousands I didn't want to spend fighting such a ridiculous claim. Why should I have to pay substantial legal fees to defend my ownership of a property I had legitimately purchased with my own money? Scott helped me anyway, generously volunteering his time to walk me through what to expect in court and how to organize my evidence effectively. We spent 3 evenings at his office, going through documents, preparing my statement, and practicing responses to likely questions from the judge or opposing counsel. He helped me compile a binder with tabbed sections containing all my evidence. mortgage paperwork, bank statements showing the down payment came solely from my account, text messages clearly establishing the temporary nature of Ethan's stay, and photos documenting the damage from his unauthorized party. For the next month, the family harassment was relentless and coordinated. Ethan started telling mutual friends and extended family members that I had stolen his inheritance and always got preferential treatment growing up, literally the opposite of reality. This alternate history was so divorced from the truth that I would have found it laughable if people weren't actually believing him. My parents called various extended family members and family friends, spinning an elaborate tale about how I had promised Ethan could live with me long-term, and then cruelly threw him out without warning in an act of sibling jealousy. The character assassination was thorough and calculated. Old family friends and distant relatives started reaching out with concerned messages. My high school baseball coach, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, called to ask if everything was okay, saying he'd heard I was going through some troubles. My mother's cousin sent me a long email about the importance of family, complete with carefully selected Bible verses about brotherly love. My parents had launched a full PR campaign against me within our social circle. My uncle Dave, Dad's brother, reached out to tell me that my parents had asked to borrow money from him to cover their legal fees. According to Dave, they had claimed I was experiencing mental health issues and was acting irrationally due to work stress. Thankfully, Dave had always seen through their favoritism and declined to fund their lawsuit, telling them he thought they were making a tremendous mistake that would permanently damage their relationship with me. The court date arrived 6 weeks after I was served with the lawsuit. I showed up in my best suit, carrying my binder of documents organized with tabs for easy reference during the proceedings. I was nervous but also confident in the facts of the case and my right to the property I had purchased. My parents and Ethan arrived together in matching blue outfits, looking like some kind of weird family law firm preparing to film a local TV commercial. Ethan had even slicked his hair back and was carrying a leather portfolio that I'm pretty sure was empty, but meant to make him look professional and prepared. My mom was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue before we even entered the courtroom, clearly rehearsing her role as the heartbroken mother for the judge's benefit. Their lawyer presented their case first, and I have to admit, it was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and legal stretching. He showed family photos spanning decades, carefully selected to portray a loving, tight-knit family, conveniently omitting any evidence of the stark favoritism that had defined my childhood. Pictures of us at Ethan's hockey games, where I was barely visible in the background. Holiday gatherings where everyone was smiling, taken moments before some family drama inevitably erupted, and my college graduation, where my parents had shown up late and left early to attend one of Ethan's games. The attorney presented an elaborate verbal contract theory where my reluctant agreement to let Ethan stay temporarily somehow translated into a binding promise of permanent housing. He twisted my words and intentions, claiming I had supposedly promised Ethan he could always have a home with me. According to their narrative, my agreement to a 4-week stay had magically transformed into some sort of lifetime housing guarantee that I was now cruelly reneging on. Throughout his presentation, my mother alternated between dabbing at her eyes and nodding emphatically at key points, while my father maintained a stern, disappointed expression aimed directly at me. Ethan kept his eyes downcast in a practiced pose of victimhood that I'd seen him perfect over the years whenever he was caught doing something wrong. The performance was choreographed to perfection. When my turn came, I simply presented the facts without theatrical flourishes or emotional appeals. I explained the mortgage was solely in my name. All payments had come from my personal funds with no family contributions whatsoever, and I had text messages proving the temporary nature of our arrangement. I also presented documentation of Ethan's continued unemployment and pattern of financial dependence, along with photos of the property damage from his unauthorized party. I began by establishing the clear timeline of events. When I purchased the house, when Ethan moved in under the explicitly temporary arrangement, and how that arrangement had been violated. I presented text messages between Ethan and me, where he had explicitly acknowledged the stay was just until I find my own place and expressed appreciation for me, helping me out for a few weeks, bro. I submitted financial records showing I had made every mortgage payment, paid all utility bills, and funded all home repairs and improvements myself, while Ethan had never contributed a single dollar to household expenses despite living there rent-free for 3 months. The bank statements clearly showed the down payment had come entirely from my savings account, built up over years of frugal living and career advancement. The photos of damage from the party were particularly effective evidence. I presented clear, time-stamped images of the wine-stained couch, cigarette burn on the deck, and scratched hardwood floors where someone had moved furniture without proper care. I included professional repair estimates for each item, highlighting the financial impact of Ethan's disregard for my property. Throughout my presentation, I remained calm and factual, avoiding the emotional appeals and dramatic pauses that characterized my family's approach. I simply let the evidence speak for itself, trusting the judge to see through the theatrical performance on the other side of the courtroom. The judge asked some pointed questions that suggested he was seeing through my family's absurd claims. "Mr. Ethan," he addressed my brother directly, "what financial contribution have you made to this property?" Ethan stammered something about sweat equity from assembling a bookshelf and mowing the lawn once, but couldn't provide any evidence of actual monetary contributions. "Did you contribute to the down payment or any mortgage payments?" The judge pressed further. At this point, my mother attempted to interject that they had contributed to my success by raising me, which the judge quickly shut down with a raised hand and a stern look. "Mrs. Miller, I'm asking your younger son a specific question about financial contributions to the property. Please allow him to answer." The judge's tone made it clear he wasn't impressed by the interruption. Ethan finally admitted he hadn't made any mortgage payments or contributed to the down payment, but argued that there had been a family understanding that he would live there long term. The judge then asked my father what I thought was the most revealing question of the entire proceeding. "And you're requesting that your elder son not only transfer his property to your younger son, but continue making mortgage payments for a home he would no longer own?" My father actually said yes without hesitation, explaining that this was the fair family solution given our respective situations. I could see the judge's eyebrows rise slightly at this extraordinary assertion. When the judge asked my father to explain the reasoning behind this unusual arrangement, Dad said something I'll never forget. "Our younger son needs more support in life. Our older son has always been able to take care of himself. We're just trying to level the playing field." The judge looked genuinely bewildered by this explanation, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. He glanced down at his notes, then back at my father, his expression a mixture of confusion and incredulity. He asked me one final question. "Did you at any point promise or suggest that your brother would have permanent residence or any ownership interest in your home?" I answered truthfully. "Absolutely not, Your Honor. I agreed to a temporary arrangement of a few weeks while he found a job and his own housing. That was over 3 months ago, during which time he made no effort to do either." The judge called a 15-minute recess, during which my parents huddled with their attorney in whispered conversation while shooting occasional glances in my direction. I sat alone on the other side of the courtroom, reviewing my notes and trying to remain calm despite the surreal nature of the situation. When the judge returned, he dismissed the case entirely, stating it lacked any legal merit whatsoever, and warning my parents' lawyer about bringing frivolous lawsuits in the future. He formally recognized my full ownership rights to the property and stated that any further claims against it would be considered harassment. He even took the unusual step of ordering my parents to pay my court filing fees, stating that their lawsuit bordered on abuse of the legal system. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I had defended my home against this outrageous attempt to take it from me, and the justice system had worked exactly as it should. The judge had seen through the emotional manipulation and recognized the simple truth. I had purchased the house with my own money, and no one else had any claim to it, regardless of family ties. Outside the courthouse, all hell broke loose. My mom collapsed in dramatic tears, sinking to the steps in a display worthy of a telenovela actress. Ethan started yelling that I was dead to him and would regret choosing property over family, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Dad just looked at me with this expression of genuine confusion, like he truly couldn't comprehend how his plan had failed so completely. It was as if the possibility that a judge would uphold my basic property rights had never occurred to him. Mom's performance continued on the courthouse steps, drawing concerned looks from passers-by who probably thought someone had received devastating news about a criminal case rather than simply losing an absurd civil lawsuit. Ethan stood over her, alternating between comforting her and glaring at me with pure hatred, as if I had done something unspeakably cruel by defending my own home from their attempted theft. Dad approached me as I was walking to my car, his voice low but intense. "This isn't how I raised you," he said, his tone full of disappointment, as if I were the one who had just tried to legally steal someone's house. "Family is supposed to take care of each other." I didn't engage with his twisted logic. I simply walked away, got into my car, and drove home to my house that I had successfully defended from their outrageous scheme. That night, I blocked their numbers on my phone, set up email filters to send their messages directly to trash, and installed a comprehensive security system the next day, with cameras covering every approach to my house. I wasn't taking any chances with potential retaliation. For the next month, I heard nothing directly from them. Though the family grapevine was buzzing with updates, Ethan had moved back in with our parents and was supposedly consulting on social media strategy for local businesses, which I strongly suspected was a euphemism for unemployed and playing Xbox in his childhood bedroom. According to my cousin Jake, who stayed in touch and kept me informed without taking sides, my parents had spent nearly $20,000 on their failed lawsuit, draining a significant chunk of their savings on this ill-conceived attempt to steal my house. Jake also called to inform me that Ethan had been posting cryptic threats on various social media platforms, vague but concerning statements like, "Karma always comes back around," and "sometimes family gets what they deserve." Nothing directly threatening enough to take legal action over, but the intent behind these posts was clear. Jake thoughtfully sent me screenshots of these posts so I could document everything, just in case Ethan's passive aggression ever escalated to something more concrete. I made sure my security system was always armed and regularly checked the camera feeds, not willing to dismiss the possibility that my brother's wounded pride might lead to something beyond online posturing. Then came an unexpected financial fallout that dramatically shifted the family dynamic. Dad's company went through a major restructuring, and he was offered early retirement with a significantly reduced pension. Around the same time, Mom's dentist decided to retire and sell his practice, and the new physician brought in his own administrative staff, leaving her suddenly unemployed after over a decade in the same job. Just like that, the bank of Mom and Dad was facing a serious liquidity crisis. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. Dad was only 60, not nearly ready for retirement either financially or mentally. His reduced pension amounted to about 60% of his former salary, and they still had significant financial obligations. Mom had been at her job for so long that her skills hadn't kept pace with technological advances in medical office administration, and she suddenly found herself competing with younger, more tech-savvy applicants in a job market that had changed dramatically since she last interviewed. Their mortgage had another 12 years left, and I learned through Jake that they'd refinanced twice over the years to pull out equity, most likely to fund Ethan's various failed business ventures and lifestyle expenses. They were house-rich but cash-poor, with limited savings and now severely reduced income. Ethan, predictably, was absolutely no help in this family financial crisis. Without my house to live in rent-free, he was now a financial burden they couldn't afford. Jake mentioned that their credit cards were maxed out, and they were juggling bills for the first time in their adult lives, prioritizing which payments to make and which could be delayed another month. 6 weeks after the court case, I received a text from Dad that simply read, "We need to talk. It's important." I didn't respond. Curtis, who had been my rock through this entire ordeal, advised me to maintain complete silence. "They're only reaching out because they need something," he pointed out when I showed him the message during our weekly poker night. "Not because they're sorry or because they've realized they were wrong." His words hit home. Not once in any of their communications, not the text from Dad, not the voicemails they'd left before I blocked their numbers, not the messages passed through extended family, had there been an actual apology. There was no acknowledgement of the lawsuit, the attempted theft of my house, or the years of favoritism. Just requests for money wrapped in guilt and emotional blackmail. The same strategy they'd been using on me my entire life. 3 days after Dad's text, Ethan tried a different approach. He somehow obtained my work email address, no idea how, possibly from a mutual acquaintance, and sent a message with the subject line, "I screwed up and I'm sorry." The body of the email acknowledged no specific wrongdoing, but mentioned he was going through some stuff and could really use a brother right now. It was the same vague non-apology he'd used throughout our lives whenever he wanted something from me after causing problems. The last line of his email revealed the true purpose behind this sudden outreach. Also, Mom and Dad are really struggling with bills since Dad lost his job. They might lose the house. I know you're doing well. Just thought you should know. The transparent attempt to guilt me into providing financial support without any genuine accountability for their actions was almost laughable in its predictability. My response to both Dad's text and Ethan's email was complete silence. I refused to engage with their manipulation tactics anymore. They had tried to legally steal my house, and now they wanted me to save theirs? The audacity was breathtaking. Weeks passed, and then Dad showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. I was in the middle of my weekend coffee routine when I received a notification from my video doorbell. I checked the app on my phone and saw my father standing on my porch, looking significantly older and more haggard than he had at the courthouse. I spoke to him through the video doorbell, refusing to open the door or disable the security system. Dad started with awkward small talk about the weather and a half-hearted compliment about my lawn, then quickly got to the point of his unannounced visit. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. Ethan had apparently racked up $4,000 on Mom's credit card before they realized what was happening and cut him off. According to Dad, they needed $17,000 to avoid foreclosure proceedings. "It's just a loan," he stressed, his voice taking on that familiar, persuasive tone he'd used whenever trying to convince me to go along with something that primarily benefited Ethan. "We'd pay you back once we got back on our feet." I finally broke my silence with 5 simple words. Actions have consequences. "Goodbye, Dad." Dad's face changed instantly. The desperate politeness vanished, replaced by the familiar entitled anger I'd seen so many times throughout my life. "After everything we've done for you," he exploded, his voice crackling through the doorbell speaker. "We raised you! We clothed you! We put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? By bailing on your family when they need you?" I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of his statement. "Everything you've done for me? You mean like paying for Ethan's education while I worked through college? Or buying him cars while I saved for a rusted Corolla? Or suing me for the house I bought with my own money? That's everything, Dad?" Dad started to respond, but I cut the connection and blocked their access to my video doorbell. The entitlement was stunning. Even after trying to legally steal my house, they still expected me to bail them out of their financial problems without so much as a genuine apology. Last week, I heard from my cousin Jake that my parents did indeed lose their house. After failing to make mortgage payments for 5 consecutive months, the bank finally foreclosed on the property. They've moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with Ethan, downsizing from the 4-bedroom house they'd lived in for over 20 years. Dad found part-time work at a hardware store, a significant step down from his former management position, but the only job he could find at his age without updating his skills. Mom is interviewing for receptionist positions at various medical offices, so far without success. According to Jake, who stays in touch with both sides of the family without trying to guilt me into reconciliation, my parents had to sell most of their nicer possessions just to secure the apartment. Dad's golf clubs, Mom's jewelry collection, their higher-end furniture pieces. Ethan's precious gaming setup was sold piece by piece to cover bills and the security deposit on their new apartment. The financial reality they had insulated him from for so long had finally caught up with all of them. My house is now truly my sanctuary, a space that is completely mine, free from the chaos and drama my family always brought with them. I've replaced the furniture Ethan's friends damaged, finishing the repairs and upgrades myself over several weekends. The couch with the wine stain has been replaced with a sectional in a darker fabric that's more practical and comfortable. I properly refinished the deck, sanding out the cigarette burn and applying a more durable stain that should hold up for years to come. The 3rd bedroom that was briefly Ethan's has been transformed into a home gym with equipment I purchased piece by piece as I could afford it. Curtis comes over weekly for our poker nights with some guys from my work. Evenings filled with friendly banter, good beer, and absolutely no family drama. These gatherings have become an important ritual for me, a reminder that family is sometimes the one you choose rather than the one you're born into. These friends have shown me more genuine support and respect than my blood relatives ever did. In an unexpected but welcome development, I've been dating a veterinarian named Olivia for the past 4 months. We met when I adopted my Rottweiler, Max, from a local rescue. Max was 3 years old, surrendered by his previous owners due to his size. They had gotten a big dog without researching the breed and were unprepared for a 110-pound canine with energy to burn. Their loss was my gain. Max is an incredible companion who happens to have an intimidating bark that serves as an excellent deterrent to any unwanted visitors. He's basically the perfect security system upgrade. Building my home gym was my pandemic project, a way to maintain my fitness routine when commercial gyms closed. I started with the basics: a power rack, adjustable bench, barbell and dumbbell set, and gradually added more equipment as my budget allowed. I installed rubber flooring and mounted a TV on the wall so I could follow workout videos or watch sports while lifting. Being able to avoid crowded commercial gyms has been a game changer for both my stress levels and my fitness progress. Olivia and I have a great connection. She's straightforward, independent, and has her own career and ambitions, completely different from the dynamic I grew up with where one person was always expected to sacrifice for another. When I finally told her about my family situation after a few weeks of dating, she understood immediately and respected my boundaries without judgment. She comes from a healthy family herself, but has seen enough toxic relationships through friends to recognize the importance of maintaining distance from harmful people, even when they're related to you. I've also started investing more seriously since the lawsuit concluded. With the threat to my property firmly behind me, I've set up a proper retirement portfolio, maxing out my 401k match and adding to a Roth IRA consistently. I've started a separate investment account for potential future property purchases, with the goal of buying a rental property in the next 5 years. I like the idea of building passive income that also creates equity over time, a much more reliable financial strategy than depending on family for support. My family doesn't get to be part of this life I've built, not anymore. I sometimes get questions from colleagues or acquaintances about family gatherings or holiday plans, and I've become comfortable with simply saying that we're estranged for good reasons. Most people don't push for details, and those who do usually regret asking when I give them the abbreviated version of what happened. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about cutting off contact, especially when they learn my parents lost their house. I don't. Not even a little bit. The attempted lawsuit was merely the culmination of a lifetime of manipulation, favoritism, and entitlement. You don't get to treat someone like an ATM their entire life, try to legally steal their house, and then expect sympathy when your own poor decisions catch up with you. The most valuable thing I've learned through this entire ordeal is that sometimes the most important thing money can buy isn't a house or a car or any material possession. It's the freedom to choose who deserves a place in your life. I worked hard for that freedom, and I don't intend to surrender it for anyone, especially not for people who have repeatedly demonstrated they don't have my best interests at heart. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's that you have the right to protect what you've earned, even from family members. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means being labeled the bad guy by people who are used to taking advantage of you. That's a price worth paying for your self-respect and peace of mind. My house is more than just property. It's a symbol of everything I've accomplished through my own hard work and determination. No one has the right to take that from me, and I'll never apologize for defending it. Family should be about mutual respect and support, not exploitation and entitlement. When it's not, sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build something better for yourself. It's been about 8 months since the court case now. According to Jake, Ethan finally got a job working at a cell phone store kiosk in the mall. Not exactly the high-powered executive position he always imagined for himself, but at least it's steady employment. My parents are struggling to adjust to their reduced circumstances, still believing they were somehow wronged when their attempt to take my house failed. Olivia and I are talking about moving in together when her lease ends in a few months. Max already adores her, and the feeling is mutual. Curtis and his wife have hinted that they might be expecting their second child, which means poker nights might eventually transition to family barbecues with kids running around in the backyard. Life moves forward. I still occasionally get messages from extended family members trying to heal the rift, suggesting I should forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. I politely but firmly explain that some actions have permanent consequences, and attempting to legally steal someone's home crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. Most eventually understand, or at least stop pushing. The strangest part of this entire experience has been realizing how much mental and emotional energy I spent throughout my life trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to give it to me. Now that I've stopped trying, I feel lighter and more focused on building relationships with people who actually value me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. My house continues to appreciate in value, both financially and personally. Every improvement I make, every memory I create within these walls, reinforces that this is where I belong. In a space I earned through my own efforts, surrounded by people who respect me, free from the chaos and manipulation that defined my childhood. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep, and that's okay.